about your experience at the sheriff's office first, and then we'll talk about what you've been up to at Windsor PD.
Sure.
So tell me what positions you held at the sheriff's office.
At the sheriff's office, I started as a patrol officer, worked my way up to patrol corporal. I was a member of our crash team. I was a member of our honor guard. I was a member of our defensive tactics, and I was an evidence technician.
What is crash team?
Crash team at that time, there was a group of us who had gone through when the sheriff's office took over a couple of the small towns. We had to start working a lot of the crashes in some of those small towns. And so some of us were sent to different schooling and were able to take different classes to get various levels within crash and reconstruction.
And what level were you?
I ended up being a level 4 was the last level I took.
Do you know how many levels there are?
I believe there are 5.
Okay, so almost the highest, second highest level.
Second highest, yes.
And so as part of the crash team, did you specialize or participate in accident investigations?
I did. So as level 4, you start working into reconstruction, where you take the data and you analyze the things that you see, both evidence that is found, photographs, measurements, data that's collected, both Faro, drone, and hand measurements, and reconstruct or get as close to possible the original scene of an accident as you can.
So is it fair to say that's sort of the difference between accident investigation and reconstruction? You take it that further step to be able to paint a picture as to what happened.
Correct. Yes.
Is there a crash team at Windsor Police Department?
There is.
Okay. Are you involved with that crash team in any way?
In the beginning, I was. I am no longer now that I'm a patrol sergeant.
Okay. So that was your initial assignment, but then you got promoted.
Correct.
You talked about using a Faro and drone data to do these accident reconstruction. Just briefly, what is Faro data?
Faro data, it's basically like laser point measurement. It's a machine that does pinpoint laser diagramming and mapping of a scene. So the machine itself will be fixated in a point. It will have its own GPS coordinates, longitude, latitude, all of that. Height. It takes all its own measurements of it internally, and then it goes out and paints a picture and captures the data of points all over a scene. And so you take that to different various points, and it will recreate and paint that scene in laser light, basically, and measurements.
We've heard a little bit of testimony today about how drones are used during crash investigations, but can you tell us how drones are helpful to you in accident reconstruction?
It helps bring together both the ground data, the evidence that's collected, along with an overall aerial view of the entire scene. So the drone, it has its own various measurements and points of data and margins of error, which are slightly higher than I think the Faros are. The Faro is a lot more pinpoint, but it gives you that overall map from the sky view. So you can actually see and put things back together as you are recreating and reconstructing.
Does drone data allow you to take measurements for the purpose of your accident reconstruction?
It does.
How does that work?
Depending on the margin of error that the drone itself is collecting and the type of software you use to place all those, it's basically taking a bunch of mini pictures like a video, and then it stitches those all together, and there's a margin of error that comes from that stitching process.
Okay. At your current assignment, do you work with drones at all at the Windsor Police Department?
I do. I am part of our drone team.
So you're familiar with that process? You just testified that previously at the sheriff's office, you were involved in something called the crash team. Approximately, and I know it's hard to get an exact number, but approximately how many accident investigations do you think you've been involved with?
Between the sheriff's office and the Windsor Police Department, I've had more at the Windsor Police Department just because it's a municipality and there's a lot more crashes. Probably investigated upwards of 80 to 90.
And of those investigations, do you always do some form of reconstruction, or how many reconstructions have you been involved with?
Reconstruction wise, I can only think of about 12 that I have done. None of them have been a full reconstruction. I have not been assigned to do any full reconstruction, just a lot of partial to try to extrapolate data that we want to compare to evidence that we're finding.
Can you please give us an example of what a partial reconstruction would be versus a full reconstruction?
Full reconstruction, you will take every bit of evidence, exact measurements of a vehicle, exact measurements of weights, both of people involved, a lot of details within that specific scene, specific to that data, as opposed to using what would be considered like general practice data. An example would be asphalt. Unless you actually take a drag sled and take a tire that matches to that vehicle and pull it along that roadway, the friction of a tire on a roadway will be different from one vehicle to the next, and depending on what type of asphalt. And so in reconstruction or in reassessing a traffic crash, we will sometimes use average data. So average friction on a blacktop, say, is somewhere between 0.6 and 0.8 for the coefficient of friction as a tire is sliding, trying to stop.
What about a partial reconstruction? What are some of the things by simply doing a partial reconstruction that you can find out?
In a partial, you can quickly gather a rough idea on speeds. So you can determine if speed was a factor. You can do a partial reconstruction to try to gather additional evidence that may have been missed by the natural eye, because you're looking in specific areas. And then doing a partial construction, you can gather details from the scene that help lead to other evidence that you might see that is related to that crash.
So it's fair to say if you did a partial reconstruction to sort of get an estimate of speed and you believe speed to be a factor, you could then do a full reconstruction to get more specific details.
Correct.
I'd like to talk a little bit about what specific training you have as it relates to being a police officer and accident investigations. What is your education background?
Right out of high school, I joined the Marine Corps. So I was in the Marines. I then got done in August of 2000. I put myself through the police academy. I went to police academy down in North Glen. I then spent some time going to school, working on my associate's degree, and just adding additional classes. Once hired with the sheriff's office, I started taking additional both defensive tactics, leadership classes, along with accident reconstruction and traffic crash data.
Okay, so you attended basic police training. Do you remember when that was?
In 1995, a little while ago.
And so as part of being a police officer, I'm assuming you have to keep current with, keep updated with trainings and such.
Yes, there are post requirements for every officer that they have to maintain throughout their career.
And then you also testified not too long ago that you're a level 4 accident investigator. Is that correct?
Correct.
So do you remember approximately how many hours of training you had to do for that?
Many hours. Level 1 is a basic 40-hour course. Level 1 is where you learn to fill out the forms. There's a crash form that's related to the state that's required for documentation. And it's the basic the basic analysis of a crash and what things to collect and how to collect it. Level 2 starts getting into more of the mathematics of it. So you start learning more about speed, time, distance, velocity, and how to transfer all of that data between, let's say you have a known distance of a vehicle and how much time it took them to stop. You can then extrapolate the speed from that based on mathematics. A lot of mathematic formulas that you use for that, and you learn most of those in level 2. Level 3 starts taking that a step further. I apologize. Level 2 is an 80-hour course. You go 1 week of learning it. And then you do a week of just reconstructions of known crashes and known data that has been done before. And you compare the information that you've learned on how you compare with other analysts who have done that same crash. And so you spend 2 weeks doing that. And then level 3 is also an 80-hour course, 2 weeks. That one, you're learning a little bit more detail. There's some additional information you learn, such as auto versus pedestrian, auto versus bicyclist, motorcycle crashes. And then level 4 gets more into detail of the motorcycle crash, and a little bit into some of the like heavy machinery. And then level 5 gets you into like the 18-wheeler and heavy machinery, which I did not take.
You said that you had specialized training in automobile versus pedestrian accident investigations. Why do you need specialized training in that versus, say, an automobile versus an automobile?
Automobile, you're talking about two similar type mechanics, and so there's a lot of equal comparisons. When you're talking about auto versus pedestrian or auto versus bicyclist or even motorcyclist, the weight comparisons are varied because the bicyclist, the pedestrian, and the motorcyclist are all a lot less weight, a lot less energy that comes into a crash. And so you have to vary, you learn some of the other mathematics that take place when you're looking at that. You also learn what to look at, like on a person for injuries and things like that when a crash happens, how those injuries are comparative to a person.
Your Honor, at this time, I would offer Sergeant Wicker as an expert in the field of accident reconstruction.
Mr. Galvin.
Judge, may I have just a little bit of order regarding qualification?
Of course.
Thanks. Good afternoon, officer.
How are you?
Officer, my understanding again is that when it comes to accident reconstruction, your experience has included 12 reconstructions. Would that be fair?
Approximately 12, yes.
Thank you. Of those 12, you've indicated sometimes those are partial, sometimes are full. Of those 12, how many of those were partial investigations?
At least 9 of them. I can only think of 3 that I've done a full reconstruction.
Okay, and with regard to the reconstruction in this case, was it a partial or a full?
Partial.
Partial.
Yes.
And as I understand, partial, you're dealing with a certain amount of data for a partial. Is that right?
Correct. Trying to gather as much as we can.
Much as you can, trying to do the best you can to reconstruct.
To try to gather where we need to start next. Yes.
And my understanding is that those are rough ideas, for example, on speed or estimates, things of that nature.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Judge, I have no objection. Thank you, sir.
Go ahead and identify Sergeant Wicker as an expert in accident reconstruction.
Thank you. I'd like to direct your attention to August 2nd, 2023. Were you on duty that day?
I was not.
Were you called to assist another agency with an accident investigation that day?
I was.
What information, if any, did you have just about the nature of the crash that had happened?
So I had received a call from Sergeant Mike Reardon, who was in charge of the Larimer County crash team. He was requesting, he knew that I had specialized knowledge in accidents involving pedestrians and bicycles. Asked if I could come out and assist. Their team was out working a crash in Timnath, and they just needed some assistance locating additional information, trying to find every bit of evidence they could on the roadway, and to anything else that would be helpful, and then in reconstructing or documenting that crash scene.
What's the first thing you did when you arrived on scene?
When I got there, I met with Sergeant Reardon and a few other members of the crash team at that time. Briefly got an update as to like the information that they were looking at. They showed me an overview of the roadway, the vehicle that was involved. There was a bike still on scene and some other various items of evidence. They were trying to keep the road closed down for traffic, but open for investigations to begin documentation.
You said there were various other pieces of evidence on scene. Can you describe for the jury what those pieces included?
So what we were looking for is anything that would help us identify like a point of impact where the crash would have occurred, evidence pointing to direction of travel of either the bicyclist or the motor vehicle. We were able to locate most of that data that we needed on scene. And then I assisted the evidence team in collecting they were collecting photographs, but I was walking the scene with them going, yes, this would be important. Yes, we need these bits of information. And then we documented both the scene, the roadway, the bicycle, and the vehicle.
What are you looking for on the roadway?
Points of impact, any debris, usually from an impact, when you have a crash like this, there's going to be some debris roughly within that vicinity of the point of impact or the point of origin of the crash. And so you're looking for any evidence that would point to the area or location that you would show as the impact point. From there, you're looking for any evidence of the vehicle slowing down, stopping, brakes marks, skid marks, shadow marks, ghost marks. You're looking for evidence of the bicycle or the pedestrian. And you're looking for any of that in the direction that the vehicle continued or the direction that all the evidence kind of points as it goes down the roadway. And so you start marking those as you get through that point. So you can go back and calculate the distance that both the vehicle and the person and or the bike traveled so that you can reconstruct roughly like speeds, if they tumbled, if they slid, things like that.
Okay. I want to ask you some questions about some of the stuff you just said. When you talk about debris, are you looking for debris from the car, debris from the bike, debris from the person on the bike? Where's this debris coming from?
It's going to be everyone involved in that crash, in that accident. So you're looking for both bicycle, motor vehicle, person, anything that would indicate that it was related to that crash, not just random roadway evidence or roadway debris.
And in this case, did you observe debris from the motor vehicle involved?
Debris from the motor vehicle, from the bicycle, from the bicyclist, and from the bike itself.
Okay. You also talked about a lot of markings that you're looking for on the road, some of which I think are more familiar than others. So I want to ask you about that so we understand the difference between those different markings.
Okay.
So I'm going to start with one that's probably more familiar, but what are brake marks?
So braking or skid marks would be any indication where a vehicle, maybe the anti-lock brake system didn't work effectively. So if you're familiar with anti-lock brakes, they're intended to not make a tire lock up. So it actually has better friction slowing a vehicle down. If a car actually locks its brakes and slides, that's actually worse. So a lot of systems, a lot of manufacturers created anti-lock braking systems to help avoid crashes and that type of activity. And so an ABS system is intended so that as hard as you press on that brake, it's going to capture the brake pad, try to slow the vehicle down, and it's going to do it in rapid succession, basically trying to stop the vehicle without making the tires lock and squeal to a stop.
Do you happen to know the make and model of the motor vehicle in this reconstruction? Or I guess, did the make and model have anti-lock brakes?
I believe it did, yes.
What are ghost marks, or I think you even had another name for them, perhaps?
Yeah, it's basically like ghost braking. So it's a term referred to as a vehicle with anti-lock braking system. As it's trying to stop, it's going to start disturbing the debris that's on the road already. So any sand, dirt, anything like that. So as the braking is happening, it does kind of pause each time. And as it does that, it shifts that dirt. And so you'll see a shift. You'll actually see it as almost like tread marks or tire marks through a debris area. So it's not the shadowing that you get if your tire locked up and laid rubber down on the road. It'll just be a shift in the dirt.
So shadowing marks would be something different then?
Shadowing would be very similar.
Okay.
Yeah.
Were there also chalk marking or some sort of marking that you observed on the roadway?
Chalk marking.
Some
Sorry.
sort of marking of the scene.
Yes, they had started to mark up some of the scene before I'd gotten there. And so they had a rough idea of where they believed the point of impact may have been, where the tire marks would have been. And then we saw some other debris areas that they had collected that people were marking as they went along. Anytime you're trying to collect as much evidence on the scene as you can, you either mark it with chalk or maybe like an evidence type tent so you can take a picture of it, or like marking paint.
Are those markings important to you when you're doing your accident investigation?
It's a good point of to start with, yes, because it gives us an idea of where the areas we're looking at to start doing our measurements.
So you said when you got there, someone had made initial markings. Did you also direct others to make additional markings that you found to be helpful?
I don't remember if we did markings. I know we placed tents and collected additional pictures and photographs of evidence we found along the way.
And you testified earlier that someone was walking with you to help document evidence that you found to be beneficial. Was that a crime scene investigator from the Larimer County Sheriff's Office?
Crime scene crime scene tech from the sheriff's office, along with a member of the crash team.
So you didn't physically take the photos, but you pointed specifically, I want a photo of that. So you're
Yes.
familiar with all of the photographs that were taken in this case?
Correct.
Or during the walk of
During that
scene?
walk, yes.
Your Honor, may I please approach the witness?
Go ahead.
Sir, I've handed you a stack of 37 photographs. They've previously been marked as People's Exhibits 11A through 11AK. Take some time to look through all of those photographs. And perhaps so they don't get out of order, you may want to turn them over or something so you remember, yeah, the exact order. Do you recognize those exhibits?
I do.
What are they?
It's photographs of some of the debris we located on the roadway, along with the vehicle that was involved and the bicycle that was involved.
Would you say that People's Exhibits 11A through 11AK are a fair and accurate description of the scene as you walked it the evening of August 2nd, 2023?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time I would move to admit and publish People's Exhibits 11A through 11AK.
Mr. Gabaldon.
Objection, Judge.
Exhibits 11A through 11AK are admitted by stipulation and authorized to be published.
Your Honor, I'd also ask for permission as needed for Sergeant Wicker to approach the screen if there's something he needs to point out.
Sergeant, if you do that, go ahead and move the microphone with you so we can pick up your voice.
We're going to go in order. I know there are a lot of exhibits, but my intent is for you to sort of describe to the jury what we're looking at. And then we'll ask some additional questions as the exhibits are up, okay?
Okay.
It takes a second for this to go off of here. Okay. So we're looking at exhibit 11A. What are we looking at here?
This will be the front of the vehicle that was involved, the front left quarter panel, driver's side.
In looking at this photo, do you see any evidence of the crash?
Yeah, you can see a displacement of both the trim pieces from the lower front and the wheel well, along with a slight indention just above the light, some black marks from the handlebars.
And I may ask you already to get up and start pointing things out to us, just because I know that you are more familiar with these types of vehicles than we are. So if you don't mind getting up, sort of twisting the microphone and then pointing out what we're looking at.
So the areas that I was looking at are some of the separation that you have here along the lower quarter panel, the trim piece that goes along the wheel well, some broken pieces along the front light. See the indentions here, which are later in photographs, but you can see the indention here.
Then we have 11B. What are we looking at here?
This is a side view of that same vehicle. Again, you can see the panel where it's broken away here, the clips. You can see the separation of the trim piece along with the slight lowering of the front bumper. See the rest of that plastic that's broken out here. See that indention still, and then you can see a secondary indention which wasn't in that first picture. In the upper hood area.
Two questions about this photo. One, what is that yellow marking by the tire?
That's the indication of where the vehicle was at rest. Okay. Somebody had painted that before.
And then in your partial accident reconstruction, were you able to determine what caused that indentation on top of the hood that we can see in this 11B?
As we continue through the rest of the photographs, you'll be able to see other documentation, but based on the evidence that we were able to put together as we did this scene, once you place all this information here, you're able to see some shadowing of a blue fiber, which was worn by the subject that was hit. This indentation matches the bicycle.
Okay. And you said we'll be able to see that clearer in later. What are we looking at here in 11C?
11C, it's a really close-up picture. I'd have to. It's hard to determine based on just this, but looks like this is going to be probably hood at some point. This is going to be that separation here. I believe this is going to be that upper impact that we saw in the side picture.
And we see a ruler there that appears to be sort of surrounding a black skid mark. What do you believe caused that black skid mark?
So based on the information we gather, and like I said, we see more through the additional photographs, but this matches up with the black tape that was along the bicycle helmet. And this impact looks very similar and matched up with the helmet that we found later on this.
This is a zoomed out picture of 11D.
That's the better one. Thanks.
Okay. So does that confirm what you believed 11C to be?
Yes, yeah, that's that headline I was talking about. See, that indention is actually indexed. There's a there's a crease along the hood for the design purposes and aerodynamics, but you can see where the impact is right above it.
11E.
That's the back of the helmet that the subject was wearing.
What, if any, significance is there in your accident investigation to sort of the chip or indentation in that helmet?
It's just, it shows one, the level of impact that is required to break these. The helmet is intended to help soften the blow of anybody that's riding a bicycle. That's the reason we have all of our kids wear them. Reason we tell every bicyclist to wear them, just to help protect them from any type of fall. It's not going to protect you from every incident, but it's going to help save some of those minor bumps and bruises, and concussions, things like that. So that's what that is intended for. So that is just showing the pressure that happened to break it in the direction.
Is that just a scanned out photo 11F?
Correct. That's just further out.
And then we have 11G. What are we looking at here?
So we're looking at some of the measurements just to give us an idea on the size and the distance of the helmet between the black tape, the blue marks, and the styrofoam that's used to help surround the inside of the helmet.
So this is the bicyclist helmet. And is that tape you were talking about sort of the tape that matched up in one of our earlier exhibits?
Yeah, it's the closest thing that we could see at the time. Again, without being at the scene at the time it happens to see exactly everything that happened. Part of reconstruction is taking what is the evidence and then trying to compare it to the things that you find on the scene. And so that's what we're doing here, is comparing what we were measuring with some of the measurements we were going to see on the hood and along with the other areas.
11H.
Same area. This is the rest of that crack.
11I.
Some markings on the wheel. This was where we think or we believe that as the bike was struck from the side, as it wrapped, that's part of the marking from either the wheel well piece, that trim piece, or from the bicyclist as the bike wrapped before it was thrown away.
11J.
So these are some of those blue fibers. So during the day, it was kind of difficult to see, but you could see some of this. This is some of the blue fiber from the shirt that the subject on the bike was.
And what does it tell you when you see fiber from a bicyclist clothing on top of a hood of a car?
So in this case, where this is, can't remember which exhibit it was, but one of the front pictures. This is that front quarter panel. This is on the front side of the vehicle. This is the front headlight. So this tells me that the bicyclist was in front of the vehicle. So as the vehicle is coming in, it would have placed the person in front of it for that impact to happen in front, for them to hit, and then you can see the markings are indicating that the shirt was then slid across the hood slightly.
Okay. 11K.
This is the further out picture of that. So this impact puts the person who's on the bike in their shirt definitely in that front side, front quarter panel.
11L.
So this gives us a full frontal view of the vehicle. So what we're looking at is trying to find any other markings or indications. And so what we were able to confirm, and we'll see it later in photographs, is markings of both where the pedal and the gears were, along with the handlebar, and then the impact of the helmet.
11M.
That's the handlebar and handle grip.
And that's
Just a version without the scale.
And then we have 11O. So first of all, it looks like perhaps this is after the sun went down. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah. So once, while there was still enough light, they spent a good amount of time collecting all the documentation that they could. while we still had daylight. And then before moving anything off the scene or moving anything, we wanted to make sure to document as much as we could. And then once it got dark, we went back and started looking at, we were able to pick up the bike, start collecting some of the data that we wanted to bring back. And then before we left the scene, I had them bring the bike to the vehicle so we could compare and get photographs of that at the same time.
So in 11O, it looks like we see the car and the bike. Can you describe what you were doing in this particular photograph?
So in this photograph, we had collected the bike. There are some photographs in here additional of the bike and parts of it, but we were placing the bike to get a rough idea of how much of the bike was in front of the vehicle to be able to indicate to us like how much of the bike was in front, where the bike was struck, and where the person on the bike would have been placed. It helps us determine potential angle and momentum as we're doing calculations later.
11P.
This is just a close-up. So from that other side, we saw it from the front. This is a top-down version, so you can see the handle, the grip with the handlebar as it, at the path that it took and the measurements, so we could compare those with the grip.
11Q.
Just another angle of that same handlebar.
11R.
So this was the bike where it was at from the crash. If I remember correctly, the person that was hit was also near this area the bike had traveled over, and this is where it was when I got on scene.
Is it typical when there is an automobile versus bicyclist crash that at some point during that crash, the bicyclist and the bike would separate?
Absolutely, yes.
It looks like sort of at the top of that picture, so not quite as far as the police vehicles, but halfway between the bike and the police vehicle, we see something in the roadway. Do you know what that is?
One piece, yes. Actually, two, maybe three. It's hard to tell exactly, but this would be the bike helmet. I believe this is a shoe, and I believe this was the visor from that same.
And so would this be an example of some of that debris you were talking about that helps you figure out the point of impact?
Correct.
11S.
Just a side view of that same bicycle.
And 11T.
Same. It's the front wheel and front forks, and the
11U.
That's the rear wheel and the gears of that same bike.
11B.
That's the visor from the bicycle helmet that was in that first picture, or in that picture like before ago.
Was there any significance to your investigation in the visor helmet coming off of the actual bike helmet?
So in reconstruction, especially with bicyclists, we learned when I went through the class that when a person is struck, whether they're on foot or in a bike or on a bike, when that impact happens, debris from that impact at that moment usually stays in line with that crash, wherever that point of impact is. It will have a tendency. In the class I took, we hit a airplane dummy, I think 9 times total that day, that was placed on a bicycle, and 9 for 9, the hat that we placed on it landed exactly where, in line with the point of impact of that crash. And so we kept doing that. We did it with SUVs, we did it with a Honda Civic, we did it with a SUV, and it was consistent that that debris was in line with rough area of the impact.
So the visor is helpful in determining the point of impact in this case.
A rough idea, yes, gives us a very good indicator.
11W.
This is the back sprockets along with the back part of the frame.
Did you note any significant damage to this back part of the frame?
We noticed that the lower frame had been pushed in, so it was up against the tire, so it actually bent inwards. So we knew that by some of the markings on the bike, I think there's another one in here, if I remember looking correctly, there's another one of the front as well, and both of them were pushed into the bike, which is showing a side impact of the bicycle, that the front of that vehicle hit it.
So the front of the motor vehicle hit the side of the bicycle.
Correct.
Okay. 11X.
Yeah, that's more of that same side impact. The front sprockets and gears.
And that top frame, does that have any deformity to it at all?
It's hard to say from this picture. There's another picture I think that shows that right better.
11Y.
This is the front wheel and the front handlebars. Most people who know how bikes work, most times that handlebar is different. It's T to the front wheel. So this is showing that they're the same, which is an indication that the handlebars and the person holding on to them, as that wheel is being placed, that handlebar is being turned with pretty decent force to change it from the point of the wheel. And in this picture, you can also see that the front fork, just underneath where the brakes and everything else would be attached, is also broken.
What is the significance of the fork being broken, if any?
It's just showing that there's pretty significant force. Not necessarily going to be speed involved. It's just going to be a heavier amount of force than a bike is going to be ready to withstand.
Just sort of the weight disparity between an automobile and a bicycle.
Correct.
11Z.
So yeah, this is where you can kind of start to see that deformity a little bit better. So the wheel is actually turning in from the impact front of the vehicle. See the slight bend. Frame itself, along with the offset of the tire.
We have 11AA.
Kind of difficult with the lighting, but you can see that the wheel is now turned. We couldn't actually turn the handlebar back the other direction, just the damage on it, to put that the other way. But that's just showing that the handlebar and the wheel were both facing the same direction, which is not fun.
11AB.
That's that front fork area. The brake. That's a better picture of that.
Is that in 11AC, we're seeing a better picture of that fork brake, I believe you called it. Is
So this little hole here, this is where the brakes, like the front brake line would be attached. So the fork is actually this piece back here is the actual fork of it. These are the attachments that help hold all the other pieces together, but that's also a metal piece that keeps that bracket together.
so it's fair to say that's sort of a stronger part of the bike than, say, the frame.
Well, this would be the strongest point. This would be the next strongest point because it's meant to hold all the pieces together.
11AD.
This is the seat to show that it was sliding. We could show that it was sliding along the roadway.
So you believe the bike was sliding along the roadway, but not necessarily the bicyclist, or you're not sure?
Probably a combination of both. And it's hard to say when they would have been separated without seeing like something specific or being there at the time.
11AE.
This is that lower frame. So like I was saying, this is where we saw kind of that indention. You can see the tires up against that frame. So it showed that that front wheel was bent in from that impact of the frame going against the tire. And then from here, you can see that lower frame where it is actually pushed up against. And then that the front gears actually deformed and pressed up against, just showing more of that side.
11AF.
So once we were able to place the handlebars in a rough idea, we also took pictures of where the the pedals on the bike may have struck the vehicle, and then we compared the markings of the pedal to scratches and marks that we saw underneath the front of the vehicle.
And so at this point, do you believe this is very early on in the collision that this is happening?
This would have been right about the time of impact.
Okay, so it would be fair to say that the bicyclist would likely still be on the bicycle when the pedal's getting lodged under the vehicle.
Correct. Yes.
And so would you expect to see some sort of injury related to this collision?
So in a collision at this point, based on what we saw up top, this would have indicated a lowered leg, ankle injury probably, ankle, lower leg, low knee.
Okay. 11 AG.
Again, just some of the markings we saw. So in that, are you able to go back?
Yeah.
You can see some of the markings on the pedal. Yeah, it's got like little, I wouldn't call them spikes, but like little grips, so that when your foot is on, it doesn't slip off. So we saw some of those along here. So in the next photograph, you see some of those scratches that we believe may have come from those four pegs.
11 AH.
Just additional pictures of that.
11 AI.
So this is that wheel and that front gear, and you can see the impact where it actually bent the gear itself against the frame of the bike.
11 AJ.
So that front picture, that very first picture we saw of the blue fibers, that's what you're seeing here. At night, we were able to shadow that with light, so you can see the additional blue fiber from the shirt as the impact happened on the hood of the car.
What is the significance of sort of what we'll call the pooling of the blue fiber and then the shadowing of the blue fiber?
This is going to be more of like immediate direct impact. This is going to be more fiber. Like if you ever shook a towel and you see all the fibers come off from that towel, like a violent shake, this would be a violent impact. So the dusting of it is all of the fiber from that dusting.
And then 11 AK.
A continuation of that. And you can actually see some of the blue fibers there. But
Thank you, Sergeant Wicker. I believe that's our last photograph, so you can go ahead and have a seat and move that mic back in front of you. I like to shift gears a little bit. You talked about sort of what evidence you, I don't want to say collected, but observed and were part of on scene. As an accident reconstructionist, is it also important for you to review all the evidence in the case, or at least other evidence that you may have access to, such as witness statements or any videos or anything that may help you sort of put this all together?
absolutely. Yeah. The more information that we can document and put together, it helps us paint the most accurate picture possible.
Okay. You testified a little bit earlier about measurements, and so I want to talk a little bit about that. Are measurements important to an accident reconstruction?
Yes.
And why is that?
The measurements are going to give you as close to accurate representation of what happened, barring slight distance differences and things like that. So what we were always taught in reconstruction is always give a benefit of the doubt to the person driving and to utilize the information in the best case scenario.
So do measurements help you sort of get a rough idea of speed?
They can, absolutely, yes.
Before we get into that, I want to sort of talk about something that I think we're all familiar with. Are you able to use black box, what's commonly known as black box data, on a car to find out how fast it's going when it's involved in a pedestrian or bicycle accident?
You can, depending on the type and severity of a crash and the year, make, and model of the vehicle. I believe that some vehicles have better capabilities than others, but we learned, early on that a lot of manufacturers started collecting that data for themselves. And then once the reconstruction world got involved with it, we were able to utilize that data. We could download infotainment system information, hard braking, turning, like all of that data is collected. And depending on the type of impact, it can even give you specific speeds, how many lights were active, if brakes were active, things like that at the time of impact.
Were you able to get any of that data in this reconstruction?
I don't believe we were. I think based on the impact, it was still slight front quarter panel, and I don't think there was enough data to trigger what's called an event in the event recorder, and that wasn't enough to give us a lot of detail.
So that perhaps would be the best way to calculate speed. What are some other ways using these measurements that you're able to calculate speed?
So going back to the beginning, like we were talking about, if there's shadowing or if there are skid marks, or if a vehicle is sliding, you can usually get that information based on the distance it slides to a point of stop. There's a lot of various things that can go into documenting like that distance. And then you use that information and you base that through mathematics to give you a speed or a calculated speed.
Is it important when, so obviously you have some moving variables such as the vehicle, the bike, the bicyclist. Is it important to have some static variables when you're taking your measurements?
Absolutely. As much information that you can gather along with your basic information. So what I would consider basic is once you know certain distances, you are able to start putting that information into mathematics to start building that back. When you start entering more variables, then you get varied speeds, and it can absolutely change how slow and or how fast somebody could be going in that crash.
In this case, how were the measurements obtained?
I utilized information that was collected both in drone and some of the calculations of where known locations were on the ground. So we try to use, in reconstruction, you try to use points for measurement that are going to be steadfast, that somebody could go out there today and still find those points. I believe in this one, we used a utility light pole that's in the area, along with two manhole covers. Those don't have a tendency to move very often. They usually stay there for several years. And so we utilize those so that somebody could take the same data today and some of those measurements and be able to go back to that scene and put that vehicle back in its exact location, put that bike in its exact location, and put all of that evidence back in the same location.
Your Honor, may I approach and grab one of the exhibits that's already been in?
Please.
Thank you. Sergeant Wicker, I've handed you what has previously been marked and admitted as People's Exhibit 12. Do you recognize that exhibit?
I do.
How is it that you recognize it?
That's a stitched together version of the drone data that was collected of that roadway and the scene.
Have you looked at that stitched together drone data before?
Yes.
Do you look at it in a photograph format, or do you put it into some sort of computer program when you look at it?
We have a computer program that is used to take a look at all that and be able to grab measurements and things from.
Okay. That was going to be my next question, if that program helps assist with measurements. Do you see that light post and those manhole covers you were talking about on that drone photo?
I do see the manhole covers. I have a rough idea. This one's kind of a zoomed out version, but I have a rough idea of where the light post is, and I think you can see part of it. Yes.
Your Honor, permission to put this photo on the screen to have Sergeant Wicker point those out to the jury.
You agree, Mr. Kavanaugh? It's already been admitted and published.
No objection, Judge.
Very good.
Oh, except I don't have that one on there. I'm sorry. Give me 1 second, Sergeant Wicker. If you don't mind, if he may approach again, just pointing out sort of what you're talking about to the jury.
So the two manhole covers that we utilized. It's okay, you can still see them. There's one right here in front of the vehicle where it came to its point of rest. It's right here. Here, on the north side of the road. And you can kind of see it, but this point here is, I believe, the light post. You can see just the top head of it.
Okay, thank you. Can I see? How many different ways did you attempt to estimate speed in this case?
I started out with just time, distance, and velocity based off the points of measurement where we had a rough idea, we believe, where the point of impact was to the point of rest of the vehicle. That one wasn't going to be very accurate because there's so many variables in how somebody controls a vehicle. So if somebody hits their brakes and just stands on their brakes all the way to the point of stop, that'll give you a certain distance. If somebody hits their brakes, lets off their brakes a little bit, then touches them again, and then controls their stop, it's going to be a controlled braking, which then varies that speed. So it's not going to be as accurate. So once I had done those measurements, I didn't feel that those were accurate based on the information I had. And so I did what's called a vault formula. Vault was something we utilized in reconstruction of both pedestrian and bicyclists and motorcyclists, because you're talking about somebody who is not in control of their own situation. Basically, a vehicle has much more energy at the time, and so it actually raises that up. And so that vehicle, the bicyclist, the pedestrian, whatever that might be, is carried slightly. And then as they fall from that vehicle, there's a distance that they fall. And then the time that once they hit the ground and they're sliding along the asphalt, that distance tells us how much energy was placed into them for them to travel that distance. So we can take that distance plus how long it took them, how long gravity took for them to fall from the hood of that car to impact that ground, how much time that took, and how gravity brought them to the ground. And then we combine those to give us a speed there.
Okay. I want to follow up on some things that you talked about, but before I do that, do you happen to know on August 2nd, 2023, what the speed limit was on that road?
I believe it was 40,
Okay.
45.
Would it surprise you if it was 40?
It would not surprise me.
You said that the first way you sort of tried to calculate speed you didn't think was accurate. Why didn't you think it was accurate?
Again, just because the variables in how somebody would come to a stop, a controlled stop is very difficult unless somebody, unless you can verify based on other information or other evidence to show that they were standing on the brake the entire time that they came to a stop. Whereas this definitely looks more like a controlled pull to the side of the road and then to a complete stop.
So there wasn't anything significant in the evidence or the investigation that stood out as making it inaccurate, or is that not the case?
Not that it would be just knowing that a controlled stop like that, there's too many variables on how the braking is used. And so that pretty much takes that out of existence, because what it can do is sway that speed tremendously.
Okay. And I just want to make it clear that speed was actually a high calculation. So you didn't think that high speeding was accurate?
Correct.
Based on everything else?
Based on the totality, yes.
Okay. So then the second way that you calculated speed, did you feel that speed was perhaps more accurate?
I felt that was a lot more accurate to work with investigators so that they had a better place to start based on the information that was collected.
And do you recall approximately what that speed was that you calculated?
Based on the vault and again, some of the variables, I used both a 6% and an 8% formula for friction based on the roadway, was somewhere between 38 and 43 miles an hour.
So I want to talk a little bit about that and as it sort of factored into your conclusion. So is it fair to say that did you believe that speed was a factor in this case?
I don't believe speed was a factor. No.
But you certainly believed that the speed was somewhere in that 38 to 43, 44 area.
Correct. Yes.
What about the location of the bike? I want to talk to you about any conclusion you may have reached about that. Were you able to determine what direction the bike was coming from?
Based on the roadway evidence and additional information that was learned, we believe the bicyclist was coming from the north to the south.
So crossing the street that the motor vehicle was passing east to
Correct.
west.
The motor vehicle
west
has
to
been
east.
going from west to east, and the bicyclist north to south.
Would that conclusion be consistent with what you believe to be the points of impact on the motor vehicle?
Absolutely, yes.
Is there anything to suggest that the bike was driving, let's say, down the center turn lane, so also driving east to west or west to east?
Based on the evidence that we found.
We talked a lot about braking earlier, the different types of braking and what braking can do on the road. Was there any evidence that you discovered to suggest that the motor vehicle had applied its brakes before hitting the bicyclist?
We went back and looked as multiple times, both in the daylight and in the evening light with shadowing. We didn't see many indications of any braking prior to.
Was there any relevance as far as that discovery and your investigation?
Not in mine at that time. Like I said, I was using my calculations based on the Bolt formula just to give us a good place to start based on the other information that we had collected at the time.
Did you have any conclusion in this case about what may have been a contributing factor to this crash?
At that point, knowing where the bicyclist was and the pedestrian, to me it looked like the pedestrian had quote unquote the right of way as they continued south, because they were more than if you look at that overall picture, they had a bike lane, the westbound lane, the emergent lane, and approximately 6 to 8 feet of the eastbound traffic that they had traveled in that crosswalk prior to being hit.
I have no further questions for this witness.
Mr. Gavilan, cross-examination?
May I have a moment, Judge?
Yes.
Good afternoon, officer.
Good afternoon.
Officer Wicker, I understand that you presently are an officer with Windsor?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Sergeant
sir.
Patrol.
Pardon me?
Sergeant in Patrol.
Sergeant in patrol. Got it. So you're very familiar with traffic rules?
Yes.
Yes. And so you're familiar with the traffic rule talking about crossing at other than crosswalks.
Correct.
So let's talk about this particular intersection.
Okay.
You've been able to identify and talk to the jury about that intersection, that you were part of a reconstruction team, correct?
Correct.
Yes. And so we're talking about that intersection. Where are the crosswalks in that intersection?
About 8 feet in front of 8 to 10 feet in front of the turn arrow, it looks like.
Okay. For what street?
Slightly east of the intersection itself.
For what street is the crosswalks?
I believe that's Saddle Notch, and I don't remember the cross street.
Okay, well, there are two streets that we're talking about, correct?
Correct.
You're talking about, let's talk about the street that you said the vehicle was traveling on.
Correct.
What's the name of that street? If I said River Pass Road, would you agree with that?
Say that again.
River Pass Road?
River Pass does sound correct.
Okay. And that would be the street that is going from east to west or west to east, correct?
Correct. The main road.
And you determined that when my client was, whoever was driving that vehicle was going from west to east to that intersection.
West to east.
Okay. And so the street that we're talking about, the other street besides River Pass Road is what?
I believe that's Saddle Notch
Saddle Rock, right?
or Saddle Rock. Yeah.
Okay. Now, you agree with me that there's no crosswalks regarding River Pass Road, is there?
There's no official markings on the roadway. Correct.
So there's no official crosswalk markings on River Pass Road.
Yeah. No painted mark.
Thank you. And as you said, you're familiar with the traffic rules. You would agree with me that when there are no crosswalks in an intersection, that whether it's pedestrian or otherwise, they do not have the right of way. And I would refer to you 424803 statute.
Okay.
You're familiar with that statute, aren't you?
Not intimately, but aware of where it's at. Yes.
Right. And where there's not crosswalks, whoever is going across that street with no crosswalks has to yield the right of way to the vehicle, correct?
Correct.
Thank you. Okay. Now, let's talk about the speed in this particular case. All right. I appreciate the fact that you have indicated that you were trying to get as many pieces of information in order to determine that. You use the word variable as a word, right?
Yes.
Now, variable for your purposes may be a little bit different in our understanding of variable.
Okay.
What do you mean by variable?
Could be debris or anything on the road that would increase or lessen the friction. The tires that are used could be a variable based on information of the vehicle itself. If there's anything with the vehicle itself that would cause it not to operate or mechanically be correct, to include the operator of that vehicle as well.
In essence, any factors that will help you make a estimation or determination about what you're looking for.
Correct.
Okay. In this particular case, for example, one variable that you could have been able to use but was not available to you was the black box.
Correct.
Okay. If the black box had that information in it, that would have been one variable or piece of information to help you with speed.
Correct.
So you were reduced from not using that. So you had to go and try other methods to determine speed.
Yes.
And one of the other variables that you would be able to use was something called time.
Time and distance.
And then distance would be another one, correct?
Yep.
And I think the third one you said is velocity.
Correct.
Okay. And in this particular case, you had agreed that even using those factors, there is not a very accurate way of determining speed, even with those factors.
You're still going to have some variables, yes.
Yes. And therefore, the estimates could be off one way or the other.
Correct.
Okay. So I understand that to make your opinion about speed in this particular case, you used another formula to do that. Tell me that again. I didn't hear it correctly.
It's a formula called iterations. It's a vault formula.
A vault formula. Okay. But it's a formula.
Correct.
And that gave you the opportunity to make a opinion about the speed in this case.
Correct.
And you indicated that speed was anywhere from 38 miles per hour to 43 miles per hour. Correct. In that range.
In that
Is that
range.
right? And that's the best you could do with those measurements.
With the information that we had at the time, yes.
With the information you had at the time. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, and you therefore gave an opinion that speed was not a factor.
That is correct.
Thank you, sir. Now, there's You had the opportunity, very thorough opportunity to talk about a number of exhibits all the way from 11A to 11A key, all those photographs. Now, purpose of all those photographs, if I may do this in summary, and you correct me if I'm wrong, was that from those photographs, you were able to see where impact had occurred on the vehicle.
That is correct.
Okay. And in addition to that, where impact had occurred on the bicycle.
That is correct.
Okay. And so from looking at all of that, it's my understanding from your testimony, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, we know that the impact on the vehicle was on the left front side of the vehicle. Would that be right?
If you were sitting in the vehicle, the left front, yes,
Another way to say it, on the driver's side
driver's
Right.
side front.
and the front part of that vehicle, right?
Yes, the front.
I think you characterize that front part of the vehicle as a frontal panel, front.
Some of the pictures were of that front quarter panel.
Okay.
Yes.
So that's another way of describing it. The front quarter panel on the left side of the car,
That would be, yes,
right? And that's where you saw impact of the bicycle on that car. Is that right?
no, that was evidence of where impact had moved the vehicle. The impact was on the front of the vehicle,
I understand, but it's on the left front of the vehicle.
left front, yes.
Thank you. Okay. Now, from what I'm understanding here, and let me finish with this, one of the things that you wanted to make very clear is that there's a difference between what we would call a full reconstruction versus a partial reconstruction.
That is correct.
And therefore, you did not do what we call a full reconstruction.
Correct.
Okay. And what we can understand from the partial reconstruction is what you just testified today.
Correct.
Nothing more. If there's any more reconstruction, it wasn't part, I hate to use that word, it wasn't of the partial reconstruction that you did.
If somebody used that data, they would be able to
Right.
get some of that same information,
Yes.
yes.
But for purposes of today, we kind of understand the impact on the vehicle, yes.
Yes,
Impact of the bicycle, yes.
yes,
And that speed was not a factor.
that is correct.
Thank you. No further questions.
Redirect.
Thank you. Mr. Gabaldon asked you about pedestrians and crosswalks. Do you remember that?
I do.
And about a statute, because he said you're an officer and you know the statutes that have to do with pedestrians and crosswalks. Is that correct?
I know of it and where it's at, just not intimate with it without looking at it.
And Mr. Gabaldon asked you about marked crosswalks.
He did.
And isn't it true that same statute also accounts for unmarked crosswalks?
I believe it does, yes.
And what are unmarked crosswalks?
Any areas in a roadway that pedestrians would cross that would be considered a crossing path. Like where two opposing sidewalks would intersect with each other for pedestrians to cross and continue their.
Your Honor, permission to republish Exhibit 12?
Go ahead.
I understand this exhibit is very hard to see on the screen, but you also have a copy of it in front of you.
I do.
And you said that you're familiar with this exhibit from your computer program. Is that correct?
Yes.
Let's start. Do you see any marked crosswalks on this picture?
Yes.
Permission for the witness to approach?
Go ahead.
And if you could point those out.
Absolutely. So the intersection that's in question, you can see the indicators here along this lane indicating the crossing east to west. And here on the southern side of the road, east to west. Some all the way down here as well.
What about unmarked crosswalks?
Unmarked, so this little section here is a sidewalk that continues into the southern neighborhood. It's an entry and exit ramp. It's like a pedestrian ramp. Both here on the northwest side, the northeast side, the southeast side, and the southwest.
Can you just describe for the jury what's a pedestrian ramp?
So pedestrian ramp, it's a widened path. It's got the little rumble strips so that you recognize the entry and exit point. It's lower, so it's down at the roadway, so you don't have to step up over the curb. And there's one at each.
Thank you. In those same traffic statutes that Mr. Gavaldon asked you about, isn't it true that all drivers have have a duty to exercise due care when there are pedestrians in roadways?
I believe so, yeah. I don't know the exact wording without looking at a statute book, but pedestrians are supposed to have due care as well to make sure, but it is incumbent on the drivers to pay attention to pedestrians as well on the side.
And in fact, in 424807, the statute that calls for drivers to exercise due care, there's even more due care to be shown to children.
Yes.
Okay, no further questions.
Any recross?
Thank you. Officer Wicker, let's go back to that diagram you have in front of you. Would you put it up again, please?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Well, looking at that diagram again and at the intersection of River Pass Road and Saddleback Pass, okay?
Mhm.
Oops.
We're good. I can still see it.
Can you still see it?
Yeah.
Okay, it'll go away. Thank you. All right, there. I'm more important that I want the jury to be able to see it. Okay. Let's go to that intersection. So you've already identified where the crosswalks are, right?
Correct.
Okay, and you also indicated where they're not. If somebody is on the, let's go to that intersection. If someone, whether it's a pedestrian or a bicyclist, let's talk about a bicyclist, is on the north side of that intersection to cross south, across River Pass Road. Okay, where is it appropriate for them to be to make that crossing safely?
Either at the sidewalk, at the north side, the northwest side, or the northeast side at that sidewalk crossing.
Would you agree with me that when instructing bicyclists that they always encourage them to be on what we would call the north west side of the street
The northwest
versus the northeast side?
So if they are crossing south, you would want to, the best instruction would be the northwest side so that they would be more obvious to traffic.
Thank you.
Anything else, Mr. Gavaldon?
Nothing further, Judge.
Can he be released, Ms. Duhan?
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you.
And Mr. Gavaldon, any objection?
No, thank you.
Sergeant Wicker, thank you for being here. You're excused. Just leave those up there for the moment. Thank you.